In 1944, amid the ruins of war-torn Italy, a weary soldier met a humble friar whose touch stilled his fear. 40 years later, that same soldier knelt before the friar's tomb and felt warmth still rising from the stone, as if grace itself had never died. The smell of melted wax filled the chapel as light poured through the cracked stained glass. A soldier, now an old man, pressed his trembling hands to the marble slab, still faintly warm beneath his fingertips. For a moment, the years fell away, and he was again in the smoke and thunder of 1944, when a Capuchin friar had prayed over him and whispered words he never forgot. Why did this man's tomb defy time? Why did the warmth remain, as though heaven had left a pulse within the stone? For decades, believers wondered if God had touched the ground of that chapel, if the friar who bore the wounds of Christ had never truly left the world. By the end of this story, you'll see the truth hidden beneath the silence and the faith that burns even when reason grows cold. Welcome to Bible Stories and Mysteries. Like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, so you never miss the faith and wonder behind the world's most sacred secrets. The sky over southern Italy was the color of ash. Smoke hung above the broken hills like a curtain that refused to lift. Somewhere in the distance, the bells of a chapel tried to ring, faint, uneven, trembling through the roar of artillery. Private Thomas Morelli, 23 years old, Catholic by habit more than conviction, moved through the fog with a rifle he no longer believed in. He had been separated from his unit for 2 days. His water was gone, his rations half rotten, his hope even less. The only thing that felt alive was the rosary tangled in his pocket, a last gift from his mother, now worn smooth by fear. He climbed a hill littered with burnt olive trees and saw, beyond the mist, a small monastery that looked untouched by the war. Its bell tower was cracked but standing, its cross still upright against the smoke. He thought it a mirage, some trick of exhaustion, but the faint smell of incense reached him, cutting through the scent of cordite and blood. Thomas crossed the courtyard, stepping over broken stone and a fallen statue of the Virgin. The chapel door creaked open on its own. Inside, candles still burned. Their light was soft, golden, steady, like time had stopped to protect them. And there, kneeling before the altar, was a friar in a brown robe. His head was bowed. His hands were wrapped in cloth. He prayed aloud in Latin, voice calm and unshaken, while the world outside screamed. Thomas stood there, unable to move. The words sounded like music. When the friar finally turned, Thomas saw a face weathered by peace, not by fear. The man's eyes met his, and the chaos of the battlefield fell silent. "You are wounded," the friar said softly. Thomas nodded, though the cut on his shoulder was nothing compared to the wound inside, the one that came from seeing too much death. The friar led him to a bench near the altar, tore a strip from his own robe, and bound the wound. When Thomas tried to thank him, the friar shook his head. "Do not thank me, thank the one who still watches." He placed a wooden cross in Thomas's hand. The soldier felt warmth travel up his arm, real, living warmth, even though the chapel was cold. Then he noticed it, faint marks on the friar's palms like burns or scars. The friar quickly closed his hands, as though hiding something sacred. Outside, artillery thundered again. The candles flickered, but not one went out. Thomas whispered, "Are you not afraid, Father?" The friar smiled almost sadly. "When the world forgets God, fear takes his place. But when we remember him, fear remembers its silence." He rested his hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Go now. Your brothers are waiting for you. And when this war ends, remember that grace walks beside even the lost." Thomas blinked, dizzy with exhaustion. The bells rang once more, long and hollow through the mist. When he looked up again, the friar was gone. No door had opened, no step echoed. Only the cross remained in his hand, still warm, pulsing faintly as if carrying a heartbeat. He staggered outside. The monastery stood empty, windows dark. He turned once more toward the valley and saw, far off, the faint silhouettes of his unit moving through the fog. They had found him. When he rejoined them, his captain laughed at his story. "There's nothing left up there," he said. "That monastery was hit last month, nothing but rubble now." But Thomas knew what he had seen. He kept the cross close to his chest that night, whispering a prayer he hadn't spoken in years. He slept without fear for the first time since the invasion. In a world where everything burned, one thing remained untouched: faith. And somewhere beneath the silence of war, a sacred secret had been left waiting for him to return. 40 years later, the war had long ended, but not in Thomas's memory. He still woke to the echo of artillery, the cries of brothers long gone, and the whisper of that unknown friar who once placed warmth in his hands. Now his hair was white, his breath slow, his steps careful. He traveled alone, carrying a single suitcase and the same rosary that had survived every season of his life. He told his children he wanted to see the place where peace first found me. They thought it was nostalgia, but for Thomas, it was unfinished grace. The bus wound through the Italian countryside, passing olive trees that had grown back from blackened roots. Each turn of the road brought memories: dust, gunfire, the scent of burning oil. Yet beneath it all, something gentler stirred, as if God himself were guiding the wheels toward a long-awaited confession. The monastery was smaller than he remembered. The stone had aged, cracked like the skin of time. Yet when he stepped inside, it smelled exactly as it had in 1944. Beeswax, dust, and prayer. Candles glowed in the alcoves, the air thick with silence. He knelt automatically, his knees trembling against the cool floor. Before him, a marble tomb stretched beneath a stained glass window. The friar depicted in the glass looked down with calm, familiar eyes. Thomas froze. His heartbeat stumbled. He knew that face. It was him, the same friar from the war. The man who had vanished after binding his wound and speaking those impossible words. Now his image was here, eternal, enshrined in light. A young monk approached, his sandals whispering on the stone. "You've come for Padre Pio." Thomas nodded, barely breathing. The monk smiled softly. "You're not the first soldier who's come here searching. He touched many lives, even after his death." Thomas's lips trembled. "After his death?" The monk blinked in confusion. "Yes, of course. Padre Pio passed in 1968. He rests here." Thomas stared at the tomb. The air seemed to thicken, as though the chapel itself were waiting for him to understand. He reached forward and placed both hands upon the marble surface. Warmth, immediate, unmistakable, living warmth. It pulsed faintly through the stone like a hidden heart. He pressed harder, feeling tears rise unbidden. 40 years, he whispered, and still, you're here. The young monk stepped closer. "The tomb is always warm," he said. "Many feel it. The church does not explain it, and neither do we." Thomas's voice broke. "I met him, during the war." The monk hesitated. "That's not possible, Signore. Padre Pio was here, yes, but—" He stopped. Something in Thomas's eyes, something between fear and awe, made him fall silent. Outside, the wind began to rise. The candles flickered. The bell tolled faintly from above. Thomas closed his eyes and remembered the friar's words, the warmth of his hand, the stillness in the chaos. It was all here again, the same peace that had found him when the world was burning. He began to pray aloud, his voice cracking between sobs, not for answers, but for remembrance, for the mystery that time could not erase. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against the tomb, whispering, "You never left, did you?" And somewhere deep within the silence, he felt the faintest echo. Not words, not sound, but presence. The kind of presence that doesn't fade when life ends, the kind that lingers in stone, in faith, in souls that still believe. He stayed there for hours. No miracles occurred. No light burst from heaven. Only a soldier and a tomb, locked in quiet understanding. When he finally rose to leave, his knees stiff, he turned once more toward the stained glass. The friar's image caught the sunlight, his eyes glimmering gold. It looked for a moment as if he was smiling. Thomas pressed a trembling hand to his heart. Faith had never felt so real or so near. Sometimes miracles do not shout. They wait, whispering beneath the surface of ordinary things until the heart is ready to listen again. If you've ever felt something sacred you couldn't explain, some warmth that reason can't define, you already understand what Thomas felt that day. Thomas stayed in San Giovanni Rotondo longer than he planned. He rented a small room above a bakery that smelled of fresh bread and old prayers. Each morning before the town awoke, he walked up the hill to the monastery, his cane tapping softly against the cobblestones. The friars began to recognize him, the quiet American who came before dawn, who never asked for blessings, only silence. He would kneel at the tomb, close his eyes, and lay both hands on the marble. Sometimes it was cool, other times warm again, like something beneath the stone was breathing. He never told them what he truly felt, how in those moments of warmth, memories returned sharper than photographs. The smoke, the chaos, the steady voice that cut through it all. The same voice that had told him, "Grace walks beside even the lost." He wondered if it had been real, or if trauma had carved a miracle from his mind, faith mystery or human need. He wasn't sure anymore. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the colored glass, he heard a young friar sweeping near the entrance. "Many come for answers," the friar said without looking up. "Few realize the answers come quietly." Thomas smiled faintly. "I'm not sure I came for answers." "Then what for?" "For memory," he whispered. "For forgiveness, maybe." The friar leaned on his broom. "Forgiveness is not something we find," he said. "It's something that finds us when we're still enough to feel it." Thomas looked at the tomb. It was only stone and candlelight, and yet it held the weight of heaven. He thought of the men who never made it home, of the friends buried in foreign soil, of the guilt that had followed him through decades of peace. He wondered if this warmth was not a miracle of the saint, but an act of mercy from God himself, a sign that even the coldest heart can still be reached. That night the wind rose outside his window, the bakery shutters rattled, and the smell of rain carried through the streets. Thomas couldn't sleep. He reached for the wooden cross the friar had given him during the war. Its surface, once smooth, was now dark and worn. He turned it over in his hand, thumb tracing its edges, and then, faintly, the same warmth, as if the cross remembered the hands that first gave it. He stared at it in the candlelight, whispering, "You still carry something, don't you?" At dawn, he returned to the chapel. The doors were open. Mist drifted through the entrance, soft and slow, filling the air with the smell of wet stone. Thomas knelt again. He prayed not for a sign, but for peace. Yet the moment he began to speak, the bells rang once, long and hollow, just as they had in 1944. He froze. The friars would not ring them at this hour. It was too early. The sound came not from the tower, but from somewhere deeper, from beneath the chapel itself. He looked around, but no one was there. Only the candles trembling as if in response. Then silence again, so complete that it almost hurt. He rested his palms against the tomb, his breath unsteady. The marble was cool this time, but a gentle vibration ran through it, like the hum of a living pulse. And though he could not explain it, he began to weep. "Lord," he whispered, "what do you want me to see?" The stained glass window above the tomb glowed faintly, catching the first light of morning. The image of the friar's face seemed to shift, the eyes deeper, softer, almost alive. Thomas felt something awaken inside him, an ache that was both sorrow and peace. It wasn't about the tomb being warm. It was about what it meant, that love, real love, leaves traces that even death cannot erase. He rose slowly, knees stiff, and turned toward the door. Outside, the village bells began their morning call. He paused, listening, letting the sound settle into his heart. In that moment, the world felt lighter. Not explained, not solved, just redeemed. Sometimes truth does not arrive in thunder. It comes quietly, through warmth, through memory, through the silence of a chapel where God still listens. News traveled faster than prayer. Within a week, whispers about the warm tomb spread through the narrow streets of San Giovanni Rotondo. Pilgrims began arriving earlier, staying longer, kneeling beside the marble where Thomas prayed. Some said they felt nothing. Others left trembling, swearing they felt the same living heat he described. One morning, as he entered the chapel, a stranger stood waiting by the tomb, a journalist from Rome, coat too new for the dust of the village. His name was Vittorio. He had come, as he said, to measure faith with a thermometer. Thomas smiled faintly. Good luck with that. The man knelt, touched the stone and quickly drew his hand back. "It's warm," he admitted, frowning. "But so is belief. People bring their own heat." Thomas said nothing. He had no desire to argue with a man who came to prove what was never meant to be explained. Faith mystery, he thought, was not a question to be answered. It was a door to be entered. That night, as rain began to fall over the monastery roofs, Thomas stayed behind after the last pilgrim left. Only the candles remained, dozens of small flames flickering in the half-dark. He pressed his palms to the stone again. This time it was cool, still, empty. For the first time, fear crept in. Had it all been in his mind? Had grief and guilt built a miracle where none existed? He whispered into the silence, "Lord, if I've mistaken memory for grace, forgive me." A single candle went out. Smoke curled upward, twisting in the air. Thomas watched it rise toward the stained glass window, where the friar's image gazed down, forever calm, forever unshaken. He envied that calm. The next morning, he walked through the village, questioning himself. Was faith meant to make sense? Or was it meant to survive where sense could not reach? A woman approached him near the fountain, holding a child. "Are you the soldier who saw the miracle?" she asked softly. Thomas hesitated. "I saw something," he said. "Maybe not a miracle, maybe mercy." The woman smiled. "That's all a miracle ever is." Her child reached out and touched the cross hanging from Thomas's pocket. For a brief second, he felt it warm again against his chest. He looked up at the sky, grey clouds rolling, the promise of rain. He whispered a line he barely understood. Even God's silence can be an answer. Later that day, he returned to the chapel to find Vittorio again. The journalist stood beside his camera, waiting. "You're back," he said. "Still chasing ghosts?" Thomas looked at him kindly. "Not ghosts," he said. "Grace." Vittorio frowned. "Grace doesn't make headlines." "Neither does truth," Thomas replied. He walked past him and knelt once more before the tomb. The marble was cool, but peace no longer depended on warmth. He prayed for those who doubted, for those who believed, and for those who no longer knew the difference. Outside, thunder echoed through the hills. Rain began to fall against the chapel windows. The candle flames bent, but did not die. And in that fragile silence between thunder and prayer, Thomas felt something deeper than miracles, the endurance of faith itself. He realized then, miracles were not proof of God's power. They were reminders of his nearness. Somewhere beyond reason, beyond explanation, grace still walked beside him. The rain stopped, the air cleared, and for the first time in years, Thomas smiled, not from certainty but from trust. Faith, he thought, does not need to win, it only needs to remain. Days passed, and the village returned to its quiet rhythm. The pilgrims thinned. The journalists left. Only Thomas remained, walking each morning through the narrow streets that smelled of rain and baked bread, up toward the monastery that had never truly left his heart. He had stopped looking for miracles. He only wanted presence, the kind he had felt in the middle of war, when one voice had spoken above the noise of death. One morning, the air felt different, still, heavier, like something waiting to be noticed. The dawn light was pale and slow, sliding through the clouds as if reluctant to disturb the silence. Thomas entered the chapel. The candles were still burning from the night before. A faint hum filled the air, almost like a song beneath the surface of the walls. He knelt, as always, and placed his hands on the tomb. At first, nothing. Cold stone, the smell of wax and dust. Then, slowly, warmth again, gentle, steady, pulsing as if from the heart of the earth. His breath caught. Tears welled. But this time he did not cry out. He simply bowed his head, letting the warmth move through him like forgiveness. A whisper formed. Not a sound, but something he felt inside his chest. "You are not forgotten." He looked up at the stained glass window. Sunlight broke through it suddenly, filling the chapel with gold. The friar's image glowed so vividly it seemed alive. The hands raised in blessing shimmered, and for a heartbeat, the eyes looked straight into his. Thomas wept openly now. The pain, the guilt, the questions, everything he had carried since the war, melted in that light. He understood then what all those years had meant. The miracle was not that the tomb was warm, it was that his faith was. He whispered, trembling, "You came for me, even when I had forgotten how to believe." The warmth faded gradually, like a gentle hand pulling away, but peace remained, deep, unwavering, eternal. When he finally stood, his legs shaking, he noticed a small group of pilgrims entering quietly behind him. They looked at him with curiosity, perhaps sensing something had just occurred. He only smiled and said, "It's real, you know. Not the heat, the love." They knelt beside him one by one, each touching the stone in silence. Some felt warmth, some didn't, but all of them began to pray. Outside, bells began to ring across the valley, steady and clear. The sound carried through the open doors, washing over the congregation like wind through wheat, the same sound that had once called him through the fog of war. Thomas stepped back, letting others approach. He no longer needed to touch the stone. It had already touched him. He turned toward the doorway, pausing to look once more at the tomb bathed in sunlight. The friar's image above seemed softer now, almost smiling. And in that moment, Thomas understood what saints truly were. Not perfect beings, but mirrors reflecting God's patience through the fragile faces of men. He pressed the cross to his lips and whispered, "Some warmth never fades." As he stepped into the daylight, the morning wind brushed his face like a benediction. He walked slowly down the hill, past the olive trees reborn from ashes, past children playing where tanks once stood. Every breath felt like prayer, every heartbeat, grace. And as the bells continued to ring, Thomas knew that even if no one else believed him, it didn't matter. He had seen the truth. He had felt it. When faith returns, it doesn't ask for proof. It asks for remembrance. If you're listening now and have ever wondered whether God still walks among us, whether miracles still happen in the quiet corners of the world, remember this: they rarely announce themselves. They wait, like warmth beneath the stone, until your heart is ready to feel again. The seasons changed quietly over San Giovanni Rotondo. The pilgrims kept coming. Some knelt in silence, some wept. Some left uncertain whether they had touched heaven or only the memory of it. And Thomas Morelli, the soldier who had once walked through war and found peace in a stranger's prayer, grew older in the shadow of that chapel. He wrote letters to his children, pages filled not with doctrine or miracles, but with gentleness. He told them to forgive easily, to listen when the world goes quiet, and to never let reason steal wonder. He never spoke about the tomb again. He didn't need to. One winter morning, the friars found him sitting in the last pew, head bowed, eyes closed. A candle burned beside him, wax running slow and silent. The cross he'd carried since the war rested in his open palm. He was gone. They buried him in the small cemetery behind the chapel, where olive branches cast shifting shadows across the stones. When they sealed his grave, one friar noticed the marble beneath his hand felt faintly warm. No one spoke of it. They only bowed their heads and whispered, "Faith remains." Years turned to decades. The world moved faster, but the chapel stayed the same. Pilgrims still knelt at the tomb of Padre Pio. The warmth, sometimes present, sometimes not, became legend, then devotion, then quiet certainty. An old friar once told a visitor, "Miracles don't come to prove God exists. They come to remind us He never left." And maybe that was the truth Thomas carried home, that God's silence is not absence, it's invitation. The light through the stained glass still paints the walls in colors of sunrise, amber, gold, and deep blue. And if you stand there long enough, when the chapel is empty and the candles nearly gone, you might feel it too. A gentle breath of warmth, like a memory made of grace. Some say it's imagination, others call it science. But to those who kneel in faith, it feels like love remembering itself. Somewhere beyond the visible world, perhaps Thomas stands again before that humble friar, no longer young, no longer lost. Two souls who met in the war, now joined in peace, their story written not on stone, but on hearts that still believe. In the end, the warmth that Thomas felt was never meant for him alone. It was the pulse of mercy, a quiet rhythm running through all creation, the heartbeat of a God who refuses to let his children be forgotten. And so the chapel waits, still, listening. Its silence not empty but full of prayers once whispered, full of tears once shed, full of faith that still glows beneath the surface of time. Some secrets are not meant to be solved, they are meant to be felt. Because what Thomas discovered in that small Italian chapel was not just a miracle revealed, but redemption remembered. Light entered where faith had once fled, and the stone, once cold, still carries the warmth of heaven. If you listen closely, in the hush after the bells, in the spaces between your doubts, you might hear it too, a silence that breathes, a love that endures, a God who never truly leaves. And when your heart trembles with uncertainty, think of that soldier who touched a tomb and felt life. Think of the warmth that defied time. And remember, the miracle was never in the stone. It was in the faith that stayed. In every generation, there are stories that remind us that faith does not fade. It waits. It waits in silence, in memory, in the warmth of things the world calls impossible. Thomas's journey reminds us that even when everything seems lost, grace still finds a way to return. Maybe you've felt it too. That quiet comfort in the middle of your own storms, that peace that no reason can explain. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below saying, "Faith remains." Your words might reach someone who needs light today. Like this video to help more people find these sacred stories, and subscribe to Bible Stories and Mysteries, so you'll never miss the faith, the wonder, and the hope that still rise from the silence of the past. Because some warmth never fades.